Hey everybody!
Hi there, welcome back to Planet in God. We are going through our Gospel Reading Challenge for the year.
Yep, we are on chapter 18 today.
18, are you sure? Yes.
18. We have 10 more after this one.
Wow. Congratulations. Yay! 10 more.
That's crazy.
Hopefully you're sticking with it. Now's a great time to pause the video, go read chapter 18, and then come back. We'll give you our notes. Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right.
So, chapter 18, I break down the first section, verses 1 through 5.
Yeah, I had nothing on that one.
Really? Wow, nothing. Well, I thought it was interesting that how it opens, the chapter 18 opens at that time. You see that being the same time that Peter went and got the money from the fish's mouth for the temple tax. So we're still in that same day. And then Jesus uses a question from the disciples to teach them about being humble. Right? Their question, right? Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he uses a little child to illustrate that the mindset that you have to have. And that being that children are completely dependent and reliant on others in order to sustain themselves. Right? That's how we need to be to the Lord. Right? We need to be completely dependent on Him.
I guess I did have some on that too.
Yeah?
Well, I started verse 6, but then I went 1 to 9 here.
Wow. You jumped all over the place.
I did. I basically the same thing though, that the little children was used as an example of how we're to be humble like them and accepting. Also noting that children are easily swayed to change their mind and get off track. That's why in verse 6, if someone causes one of these little ones, he's talking about a new believer.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think I've read it so many times before and I'm like, he's talking about little children. He's talking about, you know what I mean?
Right.
But he's really talking about new believers.
New believers, yeah. It's very interesting how Jesus, when he's talking at this time, he's going against the conventional wisdom of the day and even the conventional wisdom of today, right? We wouldn't say today that you'd have to become like a little child, right? Because there are people that are becoming like little children, literally. And that's just dumb. But that's not what he's saying. He's not saying literally become a little child, right? He's telling them in a spiritual sense. And then as you got into verses 6, I break down 6 through 11 as another section.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine, but it's a good segue in. Jesus, in this section, he's being deliberately obtuse for a reason, right? He's making an example here to make a point about the seriousness of sin. Right? Leading someone into sin, you'd be better off as if you had hung a millstone around your neck. These things, millstones, I don't know if we don't deal with them a lot today, but they're huge. You know, a ton or more in weight, right? Because they're used to grind the mill, and they usually have, multiple donkeys attached to them, grinding them, right? Grinding the mill. So it's not a light thing.
Yeah.
To go through. And then, as you alluded to there, little children could refer to one who is immature in their faith. So a new believer. The Greek word here is different than the little child in verse 2, which is important to note. So in verse 2, it's the word padion. And then in verse 6 here,
right, where he is referring to an actual
child. Right. And then here in verse 6 it's mikros, and the mikros is the same word that Jesus uses back in chapter 10 to refer to the disciples when he calls them little children.
Yeah.
So that's just an important thing to note, and that shows more of the illusion that he's talking about a young believer rather than another little child.
Right.
And then you get into Jesus, verses 8 and 9. He's being, again, obtuse for a reason. He doesn't mean that you literally maim yourself to avoid sin, but that's the seriousness of sin. and how we should be taking it. It should be as if you cut off your arm, pluck out your eye, right? That's...
Right, he wants us to remove the sin.
He wants us to remove the sin, not the body parts.
Right, yeah.
And then 10 and 11, again, Jesus warns against despising any of his little ones, referring to either little children or those young in the kingdom of heaven. The point is that we're not to show contempt for those that are under our care, right? A new believer would be under our care just like a little child would be under our care.
I find this verse really interesting because this verse proves that we have angels that, watch over us to a certain extent, right? It says, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool because I had never really found a verse that actually said that. People talk about, not that it says guardian angels, right? Because I don't really know that that's what they do, but obviously they do something for us. They do something,
yeah. Exactly.
So,
and then...
sorry, I didn't mean to cut
you're
you off. But we do see an example of that with Daniel when he's praying to the Lord, and one of the angels has to come down, but he's kept away for so long.
Right.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Not off the top of my head.
Not that angel was assigned to Daniel, but
Yeah.
you get my point, though. Like, he was doing something for Daniel.
Right.
But I just thought that was interesting.
It is.
Anyway, sorry.
And then verse 11, that's another one of those, depending on your version of Bible, you're either going to have verse 11 or you're not. Again, it's just depends on the manuscript family. It's not an error if you don't have it. It's not an error
it's cut
if you
out
do.
in some? I
It's
didn't
cut out
realize
in the
that.
newer versions. Yeah, the ESV, for example, doesn't have it. However, it does convey a truth of who Jesus is. So, I mean, it's a nice verse. It says, for the Son of Man has come to save that which is lost. Right? It's a nice verse. It shows who Jesus is, but it's not like omitting it doesn't miss the whole point of
Right. It doesn't
the
take
scripture.
away
It doesn't
from
take
the
away
main
from
point.
main point, which is the purpose and that. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind as you look at different Bibles, different versions, right? They all use different manuscript families, so they're going to be slight differences, and it's not that one is evil, that they're trying to be malicious. It's just the family.
Okay, so then what's the next section?
12 through 14, the parable of the lost sheep. The only thing I really had on this one was I made a note to reference 2 Peter 3:9, which I thought was a good parallel to this. 2 Peter 3:9 reads, "The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering towards us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance." Right? Just kind of that follow-up, if you will, to the shepherd leaving the 99 for the one. Right? That just goes to show that we're all chosen.
Right.
We just have to choose back.
Like verse 14 says, "Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish," right? So he wants all to believe on him.
Yep.
So that's what I got out of it too, which
Yeah.
correlates with your cross-reference.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I kind of take a big swath here, verses 15 through 35
Hey,
as
me
one.
too.
It is one big section, but I do break it up inside. So like 15 through 35 is the overarching section, and then there's little pieces inside of it, but it all kind of goes together.
That's literally my section, 15 through 35.
Wow.
And I had one itty-bitty note.
I have lots more than itty-bitty notes.
Okay, wow.
But essentially, in 15 through 35, Jesus is laying out the principles for church discipline. and specifically in situations where one brother offends or sins against another. This is a personal issue between two brothers, and it's not necessarily a moral sin that's being, portrayed. It's just a personal issue that has happened between you and someone else.
Yeah, we could start with mine because my thought's really small. But
Okay.
I just noted that it's important to God, our thoughts and our attitude towards each other matters.
Yeah. They do.
That was like my whole takeaway from that section.
That is a good takeaway from it
So
at the end of the day,
let's
because it does.
dive into like
All right.
your
My notes, the Larry notes. So within this grand section, 15 through 35, I take a look at a micro section here, verses 15 through 18. And here, Jesus is giving essentially 4 principles for local church discipline. First one is that it is the responsibility of the offended person to confront the offender on a one-to-one basis. Second, if there is no response, the offended person takes 1 or 2 witnesses with him. Third, if there is still no response, then that personal problem goes to the church. It goes before a larger audience. Fourth, if there is still no response, even after the church is now involved, then the church has the authority to excommunicate the offender.
Let's be clear though, church is talking about the believers.
Right, the body of believers.
Not a building.
Right.
Right, we're talking church essentially always means the body of believers. Yep. So we're talking about the people that you fellowship with.
Right. Verse 17b, when it says, "But if he refuses to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector." There, Jesus is making an analogy, especially since he has a tax collector in his midst, right? Matthew was a tax collector, so he's like, "Oh, you're calling me out? Come on, Jesus, I've been with you for a while. What did you not say? What did I miss?" Right? He's using this in the mind to, again, Matthew's book is to the Jews, so he's trying to drum up a thought in the Jews that they would have this thought in their head that Gentiles and tax collectors, right, they don't have fellowship with them. So by Jesus using that illustration, okay, that's how we are to treat this person. I'm not to have fellowship with them because they didn't listen, right? They offended someone and did not repent of that offense. And then you get into verse 18 where it talks about binding and loosing. Binding refers to an excommunication or a punishment, whereas loosing refers to not punishing or forgiving, someone that is repented. Jesus is essentially saying here that what is bound and loose on earth, what is excommunicated or punished on earth, what is forgiven on earth, will be recognized in heaven. So
that just goes to show you that your life on earth matters when we get to heaven.
It does. Holy.
Yep.
That God will recognize.
Because I think a lot of people think I can become a believer and then just live the way I want, but that's not actually,
right,
what the Lord wants.
Yeah. You're not supposed to continue in your old life.
Right.
When you become a believer, you're supposed to study the Word, and then as the Lord convicts you, change your heart and your mind to
right, and that doesn't happen like
instantly.
It's not like a complete flip, right? It's like
right. It's a gradual.
A lot
thing.
of times it's a slow process.
Right. Continuing on in the micro sections here, verses 19 through 20. Again, these verses are in the context of church discipline. I think verse 19 is one of the verses. 19 and 20 are 2 verses that are taken out of context the most. I'm going to read them for you and just think in your head as I read them. Context is key. Church discipline. Context. Verse 19. Again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. Right? Jesus in the midst of them for the purpose of discipline.
Well, right, because it's a difficult thing to do.
It is difficult. And so you're doing that discipline in the will of the Father. You are coming to him in prayer, which is why you bring 2 or 3, why you get the whole church involved, right? This is not a light thing, not something that we tread lightly in. It's something that you need to have more involvement in because there's eternal ramifications.
I think also, too, this topic is not really touched on very often within our, like, building churches.
No, it's not.
So that could be why it gets misused all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's just not
It's
something
not
is
something that's taught on.
well known.
Right.
Yeah.
Wrapping up the section on church discipline, verses 21 through 35, using Peter's question, Jesus springboards into a discussion on forgiveness. So the rabbinic practice was that you would forgive someone 3 times. And Peter saying 7, he was being generous, right? He's trying to be generous now. I'll
In
give
his
a little
mind.
bit more, right? And then Jesus, again, being obtuse on purpose, 70 times 7. He's not saying that you need to count and keep track, because that
It's
is
not actually 70 times 7.
490.
Yeah.
It's not actually, because a heart that keeps track is not a heart of forgiveness. Jesus is essentially saying that
He's saying a whole lot.
a whole lot about forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
You are to forgive unlimited. And if you want to ever challenge yourself in that, get married.
Wow.
For real.
Way to put yourself on the spot.
Yeah. And so that wraps up the chapter with a parable on forgiveness. And in that parable, we learn a number of lessons. First, that it is on the basis of having received forgiveness that from the Father that we are to forgive, right? He has forgiven us much. We should be able to forgive much. Second, that children need to imitate the Father's forgiveness to those around them, right? Again, he's forgiven us much. And then lastly, the unforgiven child will be punished for their lack of forgiveness. And then just as a final note, this is not forgiveness referring to salvation, but familial forgiveness, right? I've offended my brother in the Lord, or or real brother, whatever. I've offended someone, me, now I need to receive or give my apologies, and they need to forgive.
Right. Well, and I think forgiveness, you need both, but sometimes that person doesn't,
Right.
Receive it, which means you've done all you can. The Lord has to work on the other person's heart. You can't control the other side sometimes.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and then if you really want to read and learn more about forgiveness and having that heart of forgiveness, Galatians chapter 5, go through the fruit of the Spirit, because the fruit of the Spirit is not a coconut.
Oh my.
And then 1 John I love the book of 1 John. It's a wonderful book about the love and forgiveness of the Lord and how we should act towards others in that love and forgiveness.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
Is that everything?
That's all of the Larry notes.
That's all of the Emmalee notes too.
Brilliant.
So we will see you in the next video for chapter 19.
All right.
All right, see you.
Bye.